Hello, and welcome to the Wilson Center. I'm Abe Denmark, Director of the Asia Program. Today we'll be discussing the aftermath of the coup in Myanmar and the future of the country. I'm proud to introduce our opening speaker, Ambassador Mark Green, the new president and CEO of the Wilson Center. Prior to joining the center, Ambassador Green served as Executive Director of the McCain Institute and as Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development. Prior to his service at USAID, he served as president of the International Republican Institute, and served as ambassador to Tanzania, and served 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Wisconsin's 8th congressional district. He was also the longest serving member of the board of directors of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and also served on the Human Freedom Advisory Council for the Bush Institute and the Board of Consensus for Development Reform. And now I'll turn things over to Ambassador Green for his opening remarks.
Great, thanks, Abe. And welcome everyone to the Wilson Center, where we tackle global issues through independent research, honest dialogue, and actionable ideas. As Abe just mentioned, I'm Mark Green, and I have the honor of helping to lead the team here. And today I have the honor of introducing a program and a topic that truly touches my heart. In 2015, I had the opportunity to observe that year's historic elections in Myanmar. It was the year that the National League for Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, won its absolute majority. One of my most vivid memories from that experience came the day after the votes were actually cast. I remember sitting in a hotel lobby with a group of journalists and observers who were eagerly watching the news on our laptops as the results were coming in. We were all nervous that the junta then would actually not allow the results to come in, that they would take steps to shut democracy down before it could begin. There was a moment that morning when the internet went down, and all of us at the same time had our eyes lifted up and we looked at each other, and you could see the thoughts like thought balloons. We were saying to ourselves, aha, this is where it begins. And then a few moments later, the internet came back on. And we realized that in fact, democracy was taking root in that beautiful country. I couldn't help but recall those moments this past February 1st, the day when the junta made their move to shut democracy down. That day, the world woke up to images of armored vehicles in the streets of Yangon, to news that the military had effectively overthrown the newly re-elected government and arrested many of its leaders. In the days and weeks that have followed, we have seen extraordinary courage as students and civil servants and journalists and academics, everyday citizens from cities to villages, from Yangon to border states. They have refused to walk away from the precious democracy that had taken so very long to secure. People power at its best. So many students marching with the iconic 3-fingered salutes, singing civil disobedience despite the threats and despite the arrests. We've seen character and courage in the actions of Myanmar's ambassador to the United Nations, who told his fellow diplomats and indeed the entire world that the coup must fail and that the junta was without authority. Now there's an ambassador truly worthy of his oath and his people. Outrageously, all of that civil disobedience has been met by the most brutal of responses. Since the military crackdown began, almost 800 people have been killed and 5,000 or so arrested. The international community has broadly rejected the coup and called for an end to violence. The US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, and the EU have deployed targeted sanctions against the military and its leadership. All so far to no avail. So what does the future hold? More can be done by the international community and of course, in particular, the US and its allies and partners. To help us examine those and other questions, we are joined by a remarkable group of policymakers, officials, and experts. First, we will hear from Her Excellency Daw Zin Mar Aung, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the National Unity Government. Then we'll hear from a great bipartisan panel of lawmakers, both good friends of mine, Congressman Ami Bera, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee that includes Asia and the Pacific, and Steve Chabot, the subcommittee's ranking member. They'll give us a sense of how Congress is approaching the Burma crisis. Following that, Dr. Diana Villiers-Negroponte, a global fellow with the Wilson Center, will moderate a great panel discussion with Daw Zin Mar Aung, the special representative of the National Unity Government, Ambassador Derrick Mitchell, president of the National Democracy Institute, and Dr. Dan Twining, president of the International Republican Institute. Finally, Senator Ben Cardin will provide closing remarks on his views in the situation in Burma and what he sees as the outlook for that beautiful country. One further thought before I leave the stage. There was another moment from that experience in 2015. As I was getting ready to actually get to the polls to watch the votes come in, I remember stopping at a gas station and we were filling up the car with gas. And then a young lady came from the station itself and she asked me to come in. And she sat down and she served tea to me. And I asked her about that and she said, "We want you to know how important democracy is to us and how grateful we are for the international observers." And I said, "Look, I know I'm not supposed to ask you this, so are you willing to tell me who you're going to vote for?" And she said very simply, "I'm voting for change." That young lady tells me that democracy will win. It is in the spirit of young people like that all over that beautiful country that will power democracy and will cause the junta and authoritarian forces to eventually lose. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the Foreign Minister of the National Unity Government of Myanmar for some remarks. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you for your kind introductions. Thank you, Wilson Center, for that very precious arrangement for me and for our country. It has been over 100 days since the military illegally and unconstitutionally seized power from the duly elected civilian government. The military and its appointed State Administration Council continue to assert their authority over Myanmar forcibly. It has been over 100 days since the military systematically dismantled the country's democratic institutions. It continues to murder civilians and elected members of the parliament, demolish press freedoms, individual liberties, and detain anyone publicly voicing opposition to its rule by violence. The Assistant Associations of Political Prisoners has recorded 805 deaths committed by the security forces, and 4,146 people, including our political leaders, have been arrested, charged, or sentenced. These figures may be more in reality. It is critical to highlight this data to constantly remind ourselves of the tragedy that military brought upon the people of Myanmar and the atrocity it perpetuates to retain it illegally seized power. It is very clear that the conspirators of the coup d'etat do not serve the people's interest. They are only interested in protecting themselves. A humanitarian crisis is worsening with the influx of refugees at border areas. The number of internally displaced people increases as the security situation across the country deteriorates. So finally, the current political crisis has disrupted the economy and created uncertainty leading to instability. The current situation is an indication that the coup has failed and the State Administration Council does not control the country. The military no longer protects the people of Myanmar. Instead, they are destroying the life and the interests of Myanmar. As long as the military remains in power, the people of Myanmar will continue to demand a return to democracy. Thus, the country remains at high risk of further escalating violence, the collapse of the economy, instability at the border areas, and social instability. It is also important to highlight the regional and global implications of the coup. Our situation is a threat, not just to Myanmar's democracy, but also to global democracy. If military gender succeeds, it shows that military power and unchecked totalitarian regime can overtake democracy. We don't want Myanmar to be a precedent for other democratic countries around the world. Our situation is a manifestation of the possible great challenge against democracy in the world. The instability in our country also allows transitional crimes to increase across our borders, and that will have a long-term impact on regional peace and security. From a geostrategic point of view, the military's totalitarian regimes and its alignment with geopolitical power that put their geostrategies and economic interests over democratic values present a grave threat to freedom of navigations in the Indo-Pacific region. There is a viable alternative to the current political crisis. As a government backed by the people of Myanmar, we as the National Unity Government and NUG has been tirelessly working to lay down the principle and the roadmap to bring political, economic, and social stability back. Let me highlight the significant political milestones we have achieved so far, not only as the committee representing Daw Zin Mar Aung CRPH and the Nationality for Democracy, but also more importantly as the National Unity Government of Myanmar. As we have formed the NUG as a government with the most inclusive and diverse cabinet members in the history of Myanmar, with 9 women and 12 ethnic leaders in key cabinet positions. National Unity Government is leading an executive sector of the Union of Republic of Myanmar, exercising the mandate and powers conferred by the people of Myanmar in 2020 elections. We have promulgated a federal democracy charter that reflects the collective interests of our people and emphasizes peace building at the core, state building. The charter stipulates the fundamental principle and roadmap to address the legitimate grievances of all the people of Myanmar through the democracy. It is essential to highlight that the charter is an outcome of an extensive dialogue between the committee representing Daw Zin Mar Aung CRPH, ethnic organizations, civil disobedience movement, political parties, and civil society, including women and young. So we know that the only way to resolve the political issues in Myanmar and establish long-term peace and stability is to establish a federal union that will guarantee rights to the other federal states and ethnic nationalities. That's why we have abolished the 2008 Constitution. That is the fundamental steps towards transitioning the military under civilian control. The military has repeatedly used 2008 Constitution to instigate politics and economic instability in the country. As part of the Charter's roadmap, a constitutional convention shall be convened to develop and validate a new federal constitution. We have rescinded the illegal associations of all ethnic organizations, EAOs, in recognition of their legitimate grievances and as a step towards forging national unity and reconciliations. Due to the violent crackdown of the State Administration Council security forces, and in the absence of international responsibility to protect, we officially established the People Defense Forces for the protections and security of the people. We call the PDF, People Defense Forces, was also set as a unified military change of command to prevent violence. Because of an absence of a clear military structure, it is important to highlight that the PDF is the defense mechanisms and create towards active offenses approach against the military. The NUG has the responsibility to protect our people and the civil war of over 70 years. to implement effective security sector reform and establish federal democratic armed forces to end the violent actions, military aggressions, and hostility of the military council. It is also worth mentioning that despite the repressive and violent actions of military against key political leaders and their families since it illegally seized power on February 1, the public, particularly Generation Zs, continue to carry out the civil disobedience movement and anti-regime peaceful demonstrations. The NUG is a historic political milestone in our struggle towards democratization over the last 70 years. We celebrate our milestone as a symbol of hope and the outcomes of our collective effort to eradicate military dictatorships. However, we are not naive and remain grounded in reality. In order to sustain our struggle, more hard work is needed to bring Myanmar back under civilian democratic rules. There are two interlinked priorities that NUG needs a full support: an exit strategy for the military and revert Myanmar back to civilian democratic rule, and the implementations of the charter and preparing NUG for the post-state administration council. The most urgent issue we need to address is to defeat the gender and revert back to civilian democratic governance. As part of our national strategy, we continue to engage the ethnic armed organizations, CDM leaders, political parties, and civil society leaders across the country to align strategy to put pressure against Min Aung Hlaing and his state administration council. While we continue to push for our internal strategy, we urge the government of the international community to take all necessary actions unilaterally and through multilateralism to put pressure against Tamador. The state administration council and the countries supporting them, there is a need to cut its weapon supply, cut the cash supply, and cut the impunity. To support an NUG national unity government and EOs as deemed appropriate to strengthen our approach against the regime. We understand that the limitations of different countries to recognize governments, a continued public engagement with national unity government is a significant message that the international community is engaging and supporting the democratic forces. We need the global platform to amplify not just the atrocity being committed by the military, but also the positive stories that are coming out of this political crisis. We call on the international community to mobilize its influence to multilateral institutions and regional partners to engage key regional and geopolitical stakeholders such as China, ASEAN, the Quad, to support national unity government's efforts to bring Myanmar back under democratic civilian government. As the humanitarian impact of the coup rises, we also appeal for humanitarian assistance to those affected by the conflict, particularly at the border areas. We also appeal to leverage your influence to pressure our neighbors to open their countries for humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian situation is quite dire in Myanmar. We are still facing COVID-19, but we cannot even think about it because people face violence crackdowns. Our people want to stay in the country, but they don't have choice due to the violent crackdowns and airstrike by the military. The national unity government is currently taking appropriate steps to implement the 2021 federal charter. The following are a few examples. The dialogue process between the national unity government and other democratic forces are ongoing to finalize the National Unity Consultative Council. The process of drafting a new constitution based on the 5 guiding principles stipulates in the charter has already begun. This process is headed by the Ministry of Federal Affairs. We also understand the importance of the inclusion in the national unity government works. Thus, we continue to reach out to all other groups. And we also recognize the Rohingya population as part of the issue we need to address, and their voluntary, safe, and dignified return is one of our key priorities according to the Kofi Annan Commission reports and according to the discussion with the others, including the Rohingya community and Rakhine community also. However, let us be clear that as long as the military holds power, conditions for safe and dignified return will remain elusive. Myanmar's efforts to hold military accountable throughout this domestic judicial system have been exhausted. That's why we are exploring an opportunity to redefine the Rome Statutes to ensure that the military is held accountable in the International Criminal Court for its crimes under international law. With your continued support, we are optimistic that we will be able to return to democracy and end the decades of physical and structural violence repeatedly inflicted on our people by the military. So our deepest appreciations into all of you for your solidarity in our country and giving me the floor to be heard our voice from Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Foreign Minister. We are running a bit fast. We're a bit ahead of time. So I was wondering if you would be willing to address a few questions so that we can get back on schedule. Would that be okay with you?
Yes, I am okay.
Thank you so much. You talked about the need for the international community to support your efforts. I'm curious if you could speak a bit, since the Wilson Center is an American think tank. We were created by the US Congress. We have 3 members of Congress joining us at this event later this morning. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit more directly about what you would like to see coming from the United States, how you think the United States would be able to support your efforts to end the violence and restore democracy in Myanmar.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, the leading role of the United States is really appreciated by our people. Recently, the United States U.S. Embassy in Yangon shared the findings of the election observations. There was no election frauds, and the result of the 2020 elections was totally reflects the voice of the people. So, but at the same time, the targeted sanctions and the Senate and Congress also they approve the laws, and that make a pressure to the military leaders and state administration council members of the state administration council. That kind of targeted sanctions are really appreciated by our people, but at the same time support our CDM diplomats and the not dealing with the diplomats who is appointed by the state administration council. It is one of the issue we would like to emphasize. We understand that the diplomatic guidelines and rules engaged by the government, but at the same time, even though the acceptance of the diplomats appointed by the state administration council, but we want the United States government not to deal properly with that diplomats who are not represent their own people, just represent their military leaders, dictator. So that's why I would like to request and emphasize on that kind of issue, not just only to the United States government taking this floor and taking this opportunity. I would like to send that kind of message to others, democratic governments across the globe. It's one of our priority. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I also, if I could, ask you your thoughts on the role that ASEAN could play in all of this. The ASEAN leaders developed a plan to address the violence and restore and address the issues in Myanmar. There's discussion of appointing an envoy, yet the military, the Tatmadaw, has after accepting the agreement, has rejected the agreement, has said they will not accept an envoy until stability has returned. I'm curious on your thoughts on what do you think we can expect from ASEAN, and what would you hope to see from them as we try to resolve these issues?
Actually, we don't have high expectations on ASEAN. At the same time, we appreciate ASEAN's attempts to try to solve the Myanmar problems as a regional organizations. But people of Myanmar and also the NUG, we don't have high expectations on the ASEAN, because even in ASEAN summit, so for example, like through the individual member states, we have some kinds of encouraging message from individual member state, but that kind of message are in the ASEAN floor. So through the consensus, there are no strong statement and action by the ASEAN, that kind of association. So that's why we don't have high expectations on as an ASEAN, as an regional organizations. But recently, we received the communication by one of the leading ASEAN member states. They also offer, our thoughts. How can ASEAN's make help to the Myanmar and NUG? So something like that. So that some kinds of consultations and asking the opinion from the NUG. We have regular communication with the ASEAN, some of ASEAN member states, leading member states. But at the same time, even they don't have enough power to change or to influence the military. That was a very clear example. The May Online agree 5-point consensus, but as soon as he arrived back to Rangoon, his voice totally changed, right? So we don't have high expectation on that.
Thank you. One last question, if I could. In addition to foreign minister, before you're foreign minister, you were an activist. You represented, you were in the Parliament in the House of Representatives, representing Yonkin Township. I wonder if you could just provide a little bit of your personal experiences. What's over the last few months since the coup? What's been happening in your constituency? And just to give our audience a sense of some of the personal events that have happened beyond all the geopolitics and diplomacy that you're involved in, just to give us a sense of what the human toll that all of this has taken.
Thank you so much for your questions. And during these 3 months, this is a very first question on my personal experience. Thank you. I haven't, since after military coup d'etat, as soon as I had I realized that that was a coup d'etat, and I realized that, I don't able to go back home. We need to start another revolution. So that's why, like-minded member of parliament discuss on how can we respond and how can we take responsibility on the people who voted for me and for our member of parliament, our party. So we have totally, we feel like that we have totally responsible for those people who are voted. And then there was a lot of pressure. And that's why we are in Naypyidaw. I called to my family and my younger brother, hey, don't come back from Naypyidaw. We are sending you to attend the parliament and to represent our voice. Don't give up. So there are a lot of pressure, not just only from my family, but also from our voters and who are in my constituency. Don't give up and don't, come back without, any response to that coup d'etat. So that's why there are so many encouragements and pressure from our, people. So who are voted for, and then so we are very encouraging. And then we discuss with like-minded MPs, and we also discuss for our leaders, and then respond to form these, committee representing Pidang Zulodor, so we can represent. So we are able to represent our voice, our people's voice, and vote, and taking that kind of responsibility, not just as the member of parliament, but also as a citizen. I feel like that we have responsible, to against the coup d'etat. And then we have some kind of communication with, the people who are living in my constituency. There are a lot of supports. Then some supporters are calling me and they are crying. They are feeling so sad because of the coup d'etat, and even though they are encouraging me, and at the same time they are very much disappointed and despairs of our vote are not respected, respected by the military, and then they feel hopeless. But at the same time, they don't want to give up, and they will be back off our, their MPs, and they are, now still in contact with some people who are, very actively involved in the movement. And also my apartment is now shut down, and my family home is now, the close by the authority. My family is now run away. I have big family. My father, my younger brothers' families and younger sister families are now, they are run away, hiding because of I am actively involved in CRPH, and while after appointed as the minister NUG, but the former situation, like people are making some kinds of congratulations of being a minister, but this congratulations, it's pros and cons, So at the same time, it's taking big responsibility, but at the same time risking our life of personal life, and our not just me, but also my family. I'm comparing situation like when I was in prison and I was arrested by the military around the 1988. My family didn't face that kind of terrible situation. They can still live in their home, with their family, while I am in the prisons. But this time I'm not in the prison, but my family is run away, and their life and their properties has been threatened by the military. Currently still is going on, not just only me, but also others, CRPH members of parliament, NUG ministers and activists, artists. So everybody, every citizen has now entered, very terrible situations, and their lives are has been destroyed by the military. So that kind of bad experience are still going on. So this is what happening. It still happen, not just only me. More and more people are living under that kind of threat.
Well, Madam Foreign Minister, thank you very much for speaking with us today and for answering these questions and giving some of your personal experiences. The situation in Myanmar is indeed very serious, and the humanitarian crisis continues to worsen. And I hope that we're able to peacefully resolve this as soon as possible, that we can restore democracy in Myanmar. And I hope that soon I'll be able to visit you in Myanmar and visit your constituency. And I hope that in the meantime, you and your family stay safe. And thank you for appearing with us. Thank you for your courage and your convictions. And it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And now we're going to turn to the next panel in our event today, shifting to a discussion on US policy towards Myanmar after the February 1st coup. We're honored to be joined first by Congressman Steve Chabot of Ohio, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Asia Subcommittee. Congressman Chabot has served Ohio's 1st Congressional District for 24 years. Since becoming a member of Congress in 1994, Congressman Chabot has served on the Committee on the Judiciary, Committee on Small Business, and the Committee on Foreign Affairs. He also serves as the ranking member on the House Committee on Small Business. Congressman Chabot, it's my pleasure to introduce you to provide your remarks on Myanmar.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Wilson Center for inviting me to join with you all today for this important discussion on the situation in Burma or Myanmar and the future of that country. It's good to be here this morning with so many outstanding speakers, including, I understand, Ambassador Mark Green, who is a friend from our time in Congress together, as well as, I understand, soon my friend and partner on the Asia Pacific Subcommittee, Ami Bera, And we share a vision for the region, even though he's a Democrat and I'm a Republican. We work very closely together, especially on human rights issues like those that we're discussing today. This is my 25th year in Congress and my 25th on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So I've followed events in Burma closely for quite a few years, and I've traveled there and met with Aung San Suu Kyi, and had hoped, like a lot of us, that the country might finally be on a permanent path towards democracy. Unfortunately, you all know what happened on February 1st. Burma witnessed yet another military coup, upending the tentative progress that had been made through the hard work of so many over the years. The Tatmadaw seized control and detained numerous political leaders, including Aung San Suu Kyi, and the president, once again defying the will of the people. And since that coup, the situation, unfortunately, has only gotten worse. The junta has killed over 700 innocent civilians, including children, and detained and prosecuted thousands more. The military is also increasingly resorting to its brutal playbook: torture, sexual violence, and arbitrary killings in its attempt to impose rule by fear. Unfortunately, these atrocities are nothing new. The Rohingya faced genocide at the hands of the Tatmadaw for years. Now, some of the brutal tactics used in that genocide are beginning to be turned against everyone in the country. The Burmese people have shown great courage in the face of such barbaric actions. And that's why shortly after hearing the news of the coup, I joined with Congressman Andy Levin and introduced legislation to put the House firmly and publicly on record condemning the coup. The resolution, which passed the House in March, makes it clear that Congress and the American people stand with the people of Myanmar, Burma, in their struggle for freedom. Self-government is not the same, it's not some sort of temporary arrangement. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a gift from a military. Having tasted the beginnings of democracy, the people of Burma stood up to the military with massive protests and general strikes and a whole variety of other very brave tactics. Burma's citizens, especially its young people, are telling the military that the country belongs to its people, not its generals. And as the generals are learning the hard way, they cannot simply back out of democracy when it no longer serves their purposes. The efforts of civil society to end military rule in Burma once and for all are truly inspiring to us here in the United States and people all over the world, not the least of which is the formation of the National Unity Government. We must support their goals of bringing this bloody chapter in Burma, Myanmar's history to an end, reestablishing democracy and instituting a federal democratic union. It's time for full civilian rule in Burma and an end to the ethnic conflict that has been perpetuated by the military to the detriment of that country. For our part, the West must continue supporting the democratic aspirations of the citizens of Burma. The sanctions that the Biden administration has announced, some just this week, are welcome. However, more must be done. I therefore call on all democratic governments, especially those in ASEAN, to work with the administration to do whatever can be done to bring this coup, this junta, to an end. Sustained international engagement is critically important to restoring democracy in Burma and setting the country on a path once again to peace and prosperity. For all of us who care deeply about Burma's future, now is the time to act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Chabot. It's great to have you with us today. I understand from your staff that you have a very tight schedule, so you wouldn't be able to answer any questions. So we're very thankful to you for your time.
Thank you very much. I have a committee meeting that I have to go to right now and another one right after that. So thank you very much for asking me to participate.
We're honored to have you, Congressman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But we will soon be joined by Congressman Bera. They're going to be calling in as soon as he's done with his current engagement. But I wanted to take the opportunity that we have now to discuss a bit about why the Wilson Center is addressing this issue and why we wanted to work with the NUG. The Wilson Center was created by the Congress more than 50 years ago in order to be a bipartisan center for academic excellence, where academic work can be brought into the world of policy. And the legacy of President Wilson in his foreign policy was to bring in discussions of and considerations of democracy and human rights. For all of his other failings that we know too well, he advocated very strongly in his diplomacy the need to pursue democracy and human rights conceptualized within the context of self-determination for the people of a country. And to me, to my mind, the struggle for democracy in Myanmar is very much in line with that tradition, and working with them to discuss the issues going on, I think is incredibly helpful. So we're very thankful to them. The other piece I wanted to mention was that because we're created by Congress, it's important that we fulfill a bipartisan role, that we make sure that all of our discussions are representing all aspects of the American political discussion. So we have members of Congress from both Republican and the Democratic Party, as well as from the House of Representatives and the US Senate. Then again, fulfilling that role as well. I wanted to turn, if I could, to my colleague, Dr. Diana Negroponte, who's going to be leading a discussion in a few minutes after our discussion with Congressman Bera to discuss some of these issues and some reflections on what we've already heard. Diana.
Abe, thank you very much. And also thank you to the Foreign Minister for setting the stage for this. I'm delighted to see that Daw Zin Mar Aung is still with us, participating on this Zoom call. Abe, I think it would be helpful to give a broad context of Myanmar for our audience. Its ethnic nationalities, the divisions over years, and yet the capacity of this extraordinary nation to stay together. And you, as Assistant Secretary of Defense, must have looked at Myanmar from the Pentagon. Give us some of your perspectives on this remarkable and unique country.
Oh, thanks so much, Diana. Yes, in both my work inside and outside of government, I've worked on Myanmar. I actually was able to visit Myanmar several years ago and met with several members of both the Tatmadaw as well as the civilian leadership in Myanmar, and was really struck by how quickly democracy had been embraced, even by members in Congress who were part of the Tatmadaw, part of the military, that they discussed and embraced democratic principles and talked a lot about how working together was important in order to advance their country. I sat in dinners where across the table from me were members of the civilian leadership who'd been in jail just a few later, sitting next to and having dinner with members of the military who had either directly or indirectly put them in prison. And that dichotomy I thought was very interesting. But Myanmar is a country that's been torn apart by ethnic divisions, by regional divisions. There's been one of the world's longest insurgencies happening in various parts of Myanmar. And now the Tatmadaw is facing a challenge where they need to fight not only to preserve their own power against pro-democracy protesters, but also continuing their fights against the armed ethnic groups in the more restive parts of the country. And indications of growing cooperation between pro-democracy protesters and these armed ethnic groups, I think would be very concerning to the top Mada. The fact that their adversaries may be binding together, I think would be concerning to them. What I'm watching for, and one of the questions I asked the foreign minister, if ASEAN can play a significant role in resolving this. I'm also very interested to see what China does. Since this is on China's southern border, China has historically played a role, either positively or negatively, in Myanmar for decades. And I think if they are trying to establish themselves as a regional power, they need to have a role in this, either positively or negatively. I don't think that a country that pretends to be the dominant power in the region can sit something like this out. So I'm watching very carefully to see what China does.
Now, the Tatmadaw represent themselves as the defenders of the nation with the capacity to interact with those 135 ethnic nationalities. I'm looking forward to hearing from our Myanmar participants, and I know Daw Zin Mar Aung is there, so please unmute yourself, as to whether the Tatmadaw's claim to represent the whole of the country resonates throughout the nation. And if Daw Zin Mar Aung is unable to mute, I know Ambassador Mitchell can answer this, and he's just on the line. Oh, good. Foreign Minister, tell us the degree to which the Tatmadaw can legitimately argue that they represent the whole nation.
It's very clear. They are no more, we already, denounced the military has disqualified to be defense forces for our country and our people, because of the way they, respond to the peaceful protester and the way they broke the rules of the game, So actually 2008 Constitution is designed by the, military.
Yes.
After, they also broke the rule, the rule of the game they drafted. So, and then you can see that not just only from this military coup leader, actually since we can look back to 1988, what has happened in 2007, and so under the title of the national reconciliation through 2012, since 2012 to 2020, we have been trying, to engage under the national reconciliation. But now, if we cannot able to reform the mentality and the philosophy of the military leaderships, so it will not work anymore. And then it's very clear again, the military is no more military, no more defense, and they are disqualified to be call themselves as the military or defense forces for our country. The people, the relationships between the military and the people has been broken. So they are no more military, no more defense, no more soldier, actually. So that's why people are trying to make themselves, to defend themselves each and every township. So
young soldiers have families. Young soldiers come from the ethnic nationalities. Are they in doubt? Is there doubt that what they are doing is wrong?
Yeah, so if some of the one of the first CDM from the military is a Chin ethnics. So the senior junior officials who is Chin ethnics. So there are more and more military officials are joining CDM and communicating with us. So this is very clear. Some are some kinds of brainwash. So some are still in their military and their command, but at the same time, more and more CDM military officials are joining the civil disobedience movement.
Abe, I see that Congressman Bera has joined us, so I'm backing out. Bye-bye.
Diana, thank you so much. Foreign Minister Daw Zin Mar Aung, thank you so much again for jumping in. It's just a real honor to have you. And I'm pleased to see that we're now joined by Congressman Ami Bera. He has represented California's 7th Congressional District since 2013. He's currently a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, where he's chairman of the Subcommittee on Asia, the Pacific, Central Asia, and Non-Proliferation. He's also a senior member of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. Congressman Bera, thank you so much for joining us, and please go ahead.
Thanks for having me on. And I was sad. It's one of those busy mornings, but I didn't get a chance to hear what the National Unity government representative had to say, but look forward to my staff briefing me on this. When we look at the history of Myanmar, when we look at the recent history, and then what's been happening since February, this is a unique moment in time, and I think it's a moment in time where you see the young people, but not just the younger generation. You see the younger people partnering with a generation that lived under military rule over decades, seeking out what are basic human values of freedom, of dignity, of the ability to live your life. And they've tasted a bit of democracy, and they don't want to go back. And if we think about what's happening in Myanmar right now, I think there's broad bipartisan support throughout Congress that we want to stand with the people of Myanmar and support them, try to build broader coalitions, both with the countries in the region, whether that's through ASEAN, but also other countries externally, Japan and others, but then also through the United Nations. So things that we think about on both the subcommittee and full committee, you've seen both Chairman Meeks and Ranking Member McCall put out very strong statements. Myself and my ranking member, Steve Chabot, put out strong statements. But you've also seen the Biden administration act fairly quickly. They didn't hesitate to call this a coup. They've used some of their sanctions authority and so forth. But now that we move into the 3rd or 4th month of the resistance and the people seeking freedom, I think we have to get ready for what potentially could be something that lasts not weeks but potentially months. And I think this is a place where we have to build stronger coalitions. We have to I appreciate that the ASEAN countries have put out their 5 points, but I think the ASEAN countries can do more to help resolve this conflict. And then I think as we see some of the human suffering, what can we do as an international community to make sure we can get resources, basic food and supplies to the people in Myanmar and support the people. And then, as we think about how Congress and other governments can work with the National Unity government, both to strengthen their institutions, but then also to, if successful and if the people are given their voice and their ability to govern themselves, how can we make sure it emerges as a strong government and a strong, inclusive unity government? So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think this is going to be, unfortunately, complicated and, again, not weeks, but potentially months. And I think the international community has to come together to help the people of Myanmar be successful in this endeavor.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and really appreciate your time and your thoughts on this issue. I'm curious if you'd be able to provide some of your thoughts, some detailed thoughts on what you see as with a wide range of economic and targeting sanctions from the United States already in place. What other options do you believe the United States has going forward?
We haven't done any sanctions on any of the gas and oil interests. So certainly that's something that we could consider. I talked about working with other countries in the region that we've had conversations with others. Whether that's Singapore and others. Can you implement secondary sanctions and the like? I think the challenge there is I do think those are important conversations and steps that we should be having with countries in the region, partners like Japan and Australia. What we've seen out of the Tatmadaw, though, and the generals is that they're like, well, we'll go it alone. And unfortunately, sanctions often hurt the people of the country as well. So I think we have to take a balanced approach, certainly cutting off resources to the junta and the Tatmadaw, but also understanding how do we support the people as well and not increase the suffering. And you really are starting to see basic the food insecurity, the healthcare insecurity, and others starting to have an impact. And I'm a physician by training, and I'm obviously watching what's happening in India, and very concerned about the spread of COVID. And if it's difficult to get a great assessment of what's happening in country, and but with basic healthcare and hospital shutdown, et cetera, I think we have to be very careful there. And can we get vaccines to the people as well?
That's a very good point. I'm curious if you see a potentially constructive role for China to play in this. Can they play a constructive role? And in your opinion, will they play a constructive role?
So on the first one, can they play a constructive role? Certainly they can. And I think we would always want to keep that option open. On the second question, will they? I'm not sure. I think they certainly don't have an interest in Myanmar totally dissolving. They've got a history of working with some of the
ethnic armed groups.
Yeah, some of the groups in the periphery and so forth. So I think China probably just looks at it as who's going to come out ahead, and how do they work with those individuals. Obviously, they have real interest and investments in Myanmar, and I think they want to protect those investments. But I don't know. We'll watch closely, but I don't think they'll weigh in on one side or the other necessarily, because I think they've had a mixed history with the Tatmadaw as well.
Yeah, I see that my colleague Diana Negroponte is chomping at the bit to ask you a question, and I have learned over the years to never get in her way when she wants to find something out. So if it's all right with you, Congressman, I'll turn things over to
Of course.
Negroponte for that.
Congressman Bear, I'd like to take to the issue of refugees. One of our panelists this morning, Uchin Ling Hung, was granted refugee status in 2008, thus protecting him after 7 years in a Myanmar jail. There are others who are in similar positions. Do you see move on the part of your constituents in California, on the part of Democrats in Congress, to increase the number of slots for Myanmar refugees?
So I'll start broadly, but a lot of us thought, as President Biden came into office, that he would lift the cap almost immediately. We were a little bit surprised that some of the back and forth that happened. Certainly, I think my home state of California obviously welcomes a lot of refugees, as does my home county of Sacramento, where we have a large refugee population. I certainly think Democrats in Congress will continue to push the Biden administration to increase the cap on refugees and allow more refugees to come to America. It's part of our history and the fabric of our values. That would include refugees from Myanmar. The challenge is, what we're seeing in many places around the world, whether that's with the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, or now as the United States starts to pull out of Afghanistan. seeing the refugee flows that we will see there. So the first step is actually increasing the caps though, and being welcoming to refugees from all around the world.
Now we have on this call, though hidden, Ambassador Derrick Mitchell, who was the first US ambassador to Myanmar, as well as the special representative to that country, and Dr. Daniel Twining from the International Republican Institute. Gentlemen, we have an opportunity and a few minutes to ask Congressman Bera questions. You're on.
Derrick, take it away.
Putting on the spot, and I'm sorry to photobomb a moment ago. It's just sort of the technical issue of I showed up when I patched in. But very good to see you, Congressman, and I'm really grateful for, personally as a citizen, for your attention to what's going on in Myanmar. It's very important. Congress has historically had a very important role in this question, so it's good to see that continues with your leadership on the committee. So I'm really grateful and appreciative of you taking part in this. I mean, I wonder what I don't have a particular question, to be honest, but I just thinking how is the relationship between Congress and the administration on this, I guess, is because typically we've had a pretty good, I thought when I was ambassador, a good relationship there. And that's very important on a bipartisan basis. And then in a executive legislative partnership to really show that kind of strength and unity. How is that conversation? Where might there be differences? Where would you like to see the administration do more? I think you've said a little bit, but curious how the conversation is going.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So on the issue of Myanmar, one, it really is a bipartisan issue, but it's also bicameral. When you think about, the minority leader in the Senate, Senator McConnell, has had a long history and interest in Myanmar. So I think there's a real opportunity to speak with one voice as the whole of Congress, House and Senate. I think we were pleased with some of the early actions by the Biden administration that, Secretary Blinken and the president came out with strong statements early on. And this was shortly after they, assumed office. I think now, though, that weeks are going into months, we really do have to sit down and think more strongly, because again, I think we have to look at this as not something that's going to get resolved in the next month or two, but probably is going to be longer term. And that then means Congress, I think, is ready to give the administration additional authorities. If that's starting to think about secondary sanctions and others to continue to put this to make sure that Tatmadaw understands that we're in this for the long haul. I think now's the time for the administration to start using all its tools at the United Nations with the Security Council and building coalitions. I do think they are trying to work with the ASEAN nations, but do we attend ASEAN meetings, or do we use what leverage we have there to continue to push the ASEAN nations to actually take real actions here to try to help resolve this? And then we obviously see the suffering of the people in Myanmar. So what can we do to get cross-border aid, working through USAID and others to the people, to get food supplies? And again, I touched on, we're in the middle of this raging pandemic in that part of the world. And I think many of us are very worried about what happens, and how do we get vaccines to the people? Because again, you can't obviously go through the government there, because it won't get to the folks that need it.
Daniel
Thanks.
Twining, as we wrap up, because we're about to start the second panel, but your questions, please, for Congressman Bera.
Yeah, thanks, Diana. It's so great to see you and the congressman. And I'm going to defer to Abe Denmark. But Congressman, maybe just a very quick comment. Appreciate all your leadership. And just a thought that, thanks to congressional leadership, you do have the Magnitsky toolkit now to sanction individual leaders, which, as you suggest, is a great way of not penalizing the people. And of course, just in addition to obviously the instrument of sanctions, which is the stick, there's also the carrot that we as the United States can wield along with other friendly democracies, which is strong support for civil society, for democratic forces. There's a lot to work with in Burma. You've got a sitting parliament that was deposed by the military, but that exists, that was elected, that has a mandate from the people. You've got a national unity government, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for all your leadership. And Abe, back to you.
Thanks so much, Dan. Congressman Vera, I think you see how much enthusiasm there is on this issue of everyone wanting to ask you questions. And we're going to be having Dan and Derrick and Diana on a panel just as soon as we're done with you. But I wanted to ask you a question, if I could, on more of a long-term strategy in Myanmar. That many believe that the Tatmadaw strategy is to outlast the protesters and gradually gain back some degree of international recognition. Do you agree with those analysts that time is on the Tatmadaw side, and how can we change this equation?
I do think that's the strategy that the Tatmadaw is implementing, and they've said as much in their own. But it's like I don't remember the exact quote, but it essentially was, "Well, we don't need many friends." And I think a couple things. One, we should use the tools that are available to us. Obviously, I think a next step that's been suggested is sanctions on some of the oil and gas resources that still continue to provide revenue. We should build coalitions, but as Derrick suggested, we should also use the full tools to strengthen those democratic institutions and others, so that when we get to that point, that there's some resolution, that you have strong institutions that can survive and thrive. I don't know exactly how this ends. Certainly, you've often seen suffering in the ethnic minority communities in the periphery, and so I think they're somewhat used to it. But in the center of the country, you haven't necessarily seen that same level of suffering, and now you're starting to see it with the majority population. You're starting to see institutions shut down. Obviously, the financial institutions are shutting down, the healthcare institutions. One question that I've been asking experts is, with rank and file military that obviously have family members and everything else, at some point they're going to see their moms, dads, brothers, sisters, suffering, and at some point, many people join the military because it's a path where they, have a basic living, they can put food on their table, et cetera. As that becomes harder, how does this evolve? And again, I think we have to be ready to support the people. Because again, democracy, freedom rises from within. It doesn't come from without. And that history has shown us that that's the case. And if that situation arrives where there really is these ethnic communities all coming together in a coalition, and you see the beginnings of that starting to take place. So again, I don't have the crystal ball on how this all ends, but I do think there's a real opportunity here for a real birth of democracy.
I completely agree about the opportunity. The last couple, two questions that I wanted to ask you before we turn over to the next panel. The first is, in your role as a member of Congress and as chair of the House Foreign Affairs Asia Subcommittee, Derrick Mitchell, who's going to be on the next panel, suggested I ask what I thought was a very interesting question about whether you've thought how you would think about establishing an interparliamentary dialogue with the legislature in Burma, and how you think that would go.
It actually is something that has come up. We had our hearing last week. I think it's something that we ought to consider, right? Because I think it would send a strong message, and it's something that I think we would consider doing.
Actually, if I can clarify, there's that, but also with other Asian legislatures about Burma. So you talked about reaching out to ASEAN, or we need to deal with the region, maybe from legislature to legislature, because there's a lot of difference of opinion within Asian countries, just to show solidarity that way.
No. So on that end, that conversation's already started to take place, and does that become more formal, more public? Is it I think the interparliamentarian piece is important, and again, certainly I think working with the administration to build these coalitions are super important.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Bera. I know that the initial plan had been for just questions from me, but you started taking questions from all sides. We really appreciate your flexibility. You really roll with the punches, and I really appreciate your willingness to join us and talk about these issues.
Of course, and I look forward to working with all of you. And again, this is a real opportunity to see a birth of a real democracy. And it is coming from the people in Myanmar. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Congressman Bera. And we appreciate your leadership on the Asia Subcommittee at the House Foreign Affairs. Also, since my former boss was also a member of Congress from California, we need to make sure that we're keeping the California delegation well represented at the Wilson Center. So very much appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to turn to Dr. Diana Negroponte, who you've already seen, who's going to be moderating our panel discussion and Q&A session on the historical context in Burma. What else has been happening in Burma? Our panelists include the National Unity Government Special Representative, U Tin Lin Aung, Ambassador Derrick Mitchell, President of NDI, Dr. Daniel Twining, President of IRI. Just a little bit about Diana Negroponte. She's a global fellow with the Wilson Center, focused on the UK's global role following its departure from the EU. Prior to joining the Wilson Center, Dr. Negroponte was a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and contributed to the history of US IP. She was also a trustee at Freedom House for 9 years and is now a trustee emeritus of that organization, and affiliation and experience that she is very proud of. And Dr. Negroponte, as a good friend of mine, I'm pleased to hand over the discussion to you to explore the context of Myanmar and how the history informs the crisis today.
Abe, thank you very much for organizing this panel discussion. I think it's very important for us to be able to listen to the voices of leaders in Myanmar. And I'm honored that we have U Tin Lin Aung, who is a citizen of Maryland at the moment, but who suffered significantly as Generation 88 with 7 years in a Mandalay prison. He and his family are now safe and in the United States, but he was also a founder of a school for technology, for computer science and English. And I understand, U Tin Lin Aung, that students paid the minimum to attend your school. So it's a wonderful service that you have given to the people of Myanmar. We're also joined by the leadership of the two principal democratic institutions set up by Congress, Dr. Derrick Mitchell with NDI and Dr. Daniel Twining, Ambassador Derrick Mitchell and Dr. Daniel Twining. I may drop your titles from now on. Twining from the International Republican Institute, both of which have offices in Myanmar and moved their offices into the center of the country from the years in which those offices had to be down the Thai border in order to protect their staff. Derrick Mitchell, as I mentioned earlier, was the first ambassador to Myanmar, having been the special representative to that country for a year before assuming his plenipotentiary role. He has also worked at NDI before on various occasions, leading its Asia program. So his ascent to the presidency gives a very strong Asian perspective on the work of NDI. Daniel Twining comes to NDI from government as well. Let me just allow me to cast a view on my notes here. He was president and director of the Asia program at the German Marshall Foundation. Don't think that they only focus on Europe. They also have Asia in their portfolio, and was a member of the US Secretary of State's policy planning staff, as well as the foreign policy advisor to the late Senator John McCain. We have two men, two leaders with deep knowledge of Asia and a real concern for what is happening in Myanmar. Derrick Mitchell, I'm going to ask our Myanmar colleague, since he represents the opposition in the United States at the moment, to start us off. Activists from Generation 88, please begin. Can you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored and delighted to be with you today. And let me express my deep appreciation to Ambassador Green and the Wilson Center for organizing this important event at the very crucial time for the people of Burma. I would like to thank the chairman and the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia, Pacific, Central Asia, and the non-proliferation, and our distinguished panelists for participating in this discussion. I'm very grateful to Senator Cotton, who will deliver closing remarks, and I'm from your great state of Maryland, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the committee representing Bidonzula Daw was formed on February 5th, 2021, with 15 democratically elected parliamentarians who conduct parliamentary affairs as mandated by the people of Burma. It was subsequently expanded to 17 members with the addition of 2 ethnic political party parliamentary members. On March 5th, 2021, the CRPH announced its 4-point political goals to end military dictatorship, to gain the release of all illegally detained individuals, including President Win Myint and State Councilor Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, and to achieve full democracy, and to abolish the 2008 Constitution and establish a federal democratic constitution. Since its formation, the CRPH has appointed acting cabinet members to execute the tasks of government as necessary. As an acting government, it has taken the responsibility to fulfill the wishes of the people of Burma. So now, after broad consultations with numerous ethnic political parties and ethnic armed groups, ethnic armed organizations, and mass protest movements, and CRPH has formed a new government called NUG, National Unity Government, in accordance with the will and demand of the people. As the legitimate government based on the support of Burma's diverse political community and electoral legitimacy derived from the November 2020 elections, and this government is representing the people of Burma. We commit to engaging in proper international relations with other governments and international organizations and promoting the international laws and norms. In contrast, the illegal military junta lacks of legitimacy or effective control of the country. They have no proper support, lacked by electoral basis for governance, and have been resoundingly rejected by the people. They are unable to implement even a de facto regime, failing to carry out administrative tasks or manage the economy. They are only capable of massacring civilians and violating international laws. So in conclusion, I would like to urge international community to stand with the people of Burma and support the people of Burma and the will of the people of Burma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Daniel Twining, would you like to make some initial remarks?
Yes, thanks, Dan. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Good to be with you.
And obviously to talk about really one of the most important issues in the world right now. So look, I know we're going to have a good discussion, and so I don't want to take a lot of time, but maybe just a couple thoughts. First, the military has lost the country. This is not a divided country. It's not a 50-50 situation. The military has lost the country. We tracked at IRI that of the 330 or so cities and townships in Myanmar, in Burma, there have been protests, uprisings, resistance, ongoing active civic peaceful resistance in about 316 of them. So that literally is sort of a 90-something% coverage rate. This is not simply something relating to the urban elite in Yangon. And so we should understand the scale and depth of the opposition to the military's usurpation of power. That's a first point. A second point, Diana, is that, of course, we need to think about some kind of negotiated transition here that leads back to an open society. And obviously, the military is not going to cede total power. We should be under no illusions, as Derrick knows better than anyone. The military retained a central role over the past decade as the country opened up. And so I think part of what happened in the West surely is that we got slightly ahead of ourselves in trumpeting this great miracle of democracy in Burma at a time when, of course, the military continued to control key institutions and a significant share of seats in parliament. But how can we get back to a peaceful and more inclusive and open society that's going to involve dialogue and negotiation between democratic forces and members of the military who correctly understand that they have dug a hole for themselves and continue to dig it deeper, that they will never have popular consent for their illegitimate rule. There are various examples, of course, in Asia of how these sorts of transitions have happened. So there are lots of I think, case studies for us to look at and talk about. One that may not be obvious actually is in East Timor, in Timor-Leste, where, of course, as you know, there was a long-running resistance to Indonesian military rule. And throughout this period, particularly in the end game, the Timorese democratic resistance was engaged in extensive conversations with Indonesian military counterparts about transitioning to a different system. So that's going to need to happen. And of course, we know, in fact, that the military is divided because increasingly its members are understanding the danger that they have put the country in, and of course, the military's own role in it. The third point, Diana, is just about thinking about inclusivity. You mentioned Burma's 135 ethnic groups. We all know that this is the country that has suffered the longest running active civil war that the world has known in the last century or so. So let's not minimize the challenge, of course, of unity, but let's also understand that this is an opportunity to create a more inclusive and extensive coalition of democratic forces that includes, of course, the MLD, but that also includes the ethnic groups, that really the military has done more than perhaps any other actor to unite the country in ways that might overcome many of the historical fault lines that have plagued it in the past. And so let's really work with our democratic counterparts. Of course, this is a job for the people of Burma, but let's really support their efforts to create an inclusive democratic movement that, of course, reaches not just the political class, but that includes all of these amazing young people who are at the forefront of fighting for freedom in their country. And by the way, the young people leading is not new. I mean, we saw it in the 1940s. We saw it in 1974. We saw it in 1988, as you suggested. We saw it in the 90s. We saw it in 2007. We've seen it throughout. And so young people are once again in the vanguard. And this is an opportunity for democratic political forces in Burma to incorporate them in really what is a nationwide movement towards a more open and better future. I have a lot more to say, but I'll stop because I know we'll have a nice chance to chat about all these issues. Thank you.
Daniel, I want to take up that last issue and discuss it with you and Hu Jin Ling Hong, which is the access to the internet, the access to social media, which is key and makes this protest distinct from previous ones. Is it open, or has the Tatmadaw closed it off?
Is that for me?
We start, and I hope that Hu Jin Ling Hong will join us.
No, okay. I'm happy to defer to him, please.
All right, thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Diana. Yes, at the beginning of the protest, the internet access is wide open, and mobile internet access are open also. So they have access to everywhere. I mean, the protesters and the civilians and the citizens are able to communicate each other freely. But a little bit later, that is not the first time, you know, the military has done those kind of things. Let's refer back to 2007. In one Saffron Revolution, you know, in 2007, they did the same thing. They cut off internet access, and so that way they cut off they black out the information coming out of Burma to the world. Same thing happened in right now, because they noticed that if they didn't cut off the internet access, then their brutal crackdown will go to internet, and then everybody around the world and every country around the world and every leaders around the world can see, and they are scared of that kind of thing and the pressure from international communities. So that's why they cut off internet access. Now even mobile internet access are also cut down, and they have some kind of internet access, but it is very limited and they are being monitored. So people are using the VPN, you know, virtual private network, to hide their IP addresses from the internet, and then because they could be arrested at any time if they are noticed that they are using from this IP address, from that physical address, then they can be chased down and be arrested today, and then the next morning they'll be dead.
I don't want to ask either IRI or NDI for details of it, but do you have access with the democratic leaders and the human rights defenders in Myanmar, Burma?
We do. I mean, they're on the run. They, as Tin Lin Aung said, the coverage, internet coverage is spotty now. But they're our friends, they're our partners, as it is with IRI. These are the people that we had worked with for a long time and gotten to know on the ground, who were duly elected legislators or leading civil society activists. And the challenge is going to be for the NUG or the CRPH, whatever, is to figure out how to remain united, how to continue to communicate, how to coordinate their activities. And as stated earlier by Zin Mar Aung, that you know, it's a very diverse group. These folks are not necessarily used to working all together, certainly not dispersed as they are. So the challenge will be how to continue this engagement in a constructive way while they're trying also to reconcile their divisions and their differences from within. But yes, the short answer is absolutely, we're trying to stay as engaged and connected as possible.
Daniel, IRI's connectivity.
Yes, I mean, we and other democracy institutions worked offshore in the bad old days. And so, of course, we're in a totally different environment here, both politically, but also technologically. It is a reminder, though, Diana, I mean, a theme of the conversation you've been having here this morning is about, you know, the autarky factor in Burmese politics and within the Tatmadaw. And this idea of cutting the country off from the internet, from international banking and financial networks. It's just extraordinary when we look at the rest of Asia and we think about the Asian development miracle that has taken place over the last 3, 4, 5 decades. And that Burma has not been part of that. And of course, it began as it opened up here over the past decade. And now the military has tried to turn that off. And really, I think we all just need to acknowledge that in the 21st century, in this naturally rich country teeming with bright people, that of course the way forward in terms of prosperity and development is that connectivity, is turning that back on to the internet, to the international financial system, to the tourist trade. All these things, all these actions of the military have dealt so much harm to their own ambitions to develop the country. And of course that pushes the country only further in the direction of kind of Chinese economic capture, which is something ironically that the military leadership itself is opposed to and wants to resist. So this question of connectivity has serious implications, not just for our little NGOs or our democracy partners, but really for the aspirations of this entire country to be part of that Asian growth story.
Daniel, thank you. Ambassador Mitchell, I read your piece in Foreign Policy and the way that you took on the Singapore representative. Can you share with us the position of NDI and perhaps indicate to what extent NDI can still maintain its staff and office in this extraordinary country?
Well, there's no particular position. That wasn't a position of NDI. That was my personal position.
Okay.
I mean, NDI's position everywhere, though, is pretty straightforward. That, and we have a new, mission statement, vision statement that says we support democracy prevailing with dignity for all everywhere. So yes, our position in Burma and Myanmar is pretty clear in favor of democracy, in favor of the restitution of the duly elected legislature and leadership, and eventually the transition to civilian control over the military as soon as possible. So in that regard, yes, of course, NDI has a position. In terms of that article, I read the piece by Bilahari Kausikan in Singapore, which was astounding to me, but I knew it was there. It's a sort of traditional, quote, realist. It's not realist, but they like to sort of fashion themselves, if I may say, as realist by saying, this happens, nothing we can do about it. We've seen this before. We'll just watch the thing burn and we'll pick up the pieces later. And he essentially said, look, ASEAN is going to fake like it's going to do something here, but it's not really going to do much. And we need the Americans and others to support that because there's not much we can do. And I found it absolutely morally and strategically blind. I mean, not just morally. You could say, well, NDI or human rights people, all about morality and look at the realistic, look at the situation as it really is. Clearly, it's morally blind. But strategically, it's blind, as stated by the congressman and by others this morning, which is to say that this is a failed state in the heart of Asia. This is a people in the country who are not going to give up. As you stated, they have tasted freedom in the past 10 years, young people who have tasted the internet. And that was part of our strategy. I mean, was to open the place up when there was a slight opening, get the towers up, get the internet in, open it up so it's much more difficult to attack back than it is to move forward. We never had any illusions that the military could go back and do something like this. Their mindsets hadn't changed. But if they had chosen to, that it would be much harder, it'd be a much bigger cost. And what we're seeing today is a result of that. So the fact is that the military is on the path to destruction. The people are not going to give up. And that's going to lead to a potential Syria or a failed state. And that's not in the interest of the region. So they have to wake up to it. Singapore and the other ASEAN countries need to wake up. The United States needs to wake up a little bit. Japan needs to wake up. India needs to wake up. That this is not Thailand 2014. This is not Cambodia under Hun Sen. This is something really devastating to regional stability. If you believe that that the history of the 21st century is going to be written in Asia, as seems to be the talking point in Washington right now, you should very much care that at the crossroads of Asia, we have this conflagration and lost opportunity as well that is flaring up. And my piece was meant to say, basically ringing a bell as an Asianist and also as a person who cares about democracy and deeply feels for Myanmar personally, just the ringing a bell, wake up, because you're seeing a disaster in slow motion, and you've got to get on top of this. And I haven't seen them wake up, frankly. The ASEAN had their meeting. They had their five-step program, but they're not following through. And we're not seeing the urgency that I think is essential here. And that's basically what my piece was taking on the so-called realist perspective and trying to demonstrate it's not realist at all. It's in fact putting your head in the sand and watching something that will have real impact on the region, create a conflagration that will affect all of us.
Derrick Mitchell, as US ambassador, you will have engaged with the military leadership. Is there any leverage that the United States can exercise with that leadership?
The United States, it's very difficult now. Our leverage is limited. I think we had a little bit more leverage some years back, but to be very honest, the Rohingya crisis in 2017 alienated us from certainly the military and the people of the country, and even the government, even Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD government. It wasn't, frankly, our fault. We stood up for what was right with the genocide, the crimes against humanity, whatever you want to call what happened to the Rohingya. But we don't have the relationships today we have then. And as anything around the world in diplomacy, but certainly in Asia and in Burma, relationships matter. So we don't have the same relationships. I think we can do more, and we did through our military to demonstrate our distaste, because they do deeply care, their military, about what other militaries and what our military thinks, but it's very limited leverage. And the military is not going to listen to us. They're in an existential battle in their view for both their personal well-being, their position in the country. What we need to do is then we need to take a leadership position in building a coalition. And again, lighting a fire under our partners and allies in Asia to demonstrate that even if, it's a long shot, we have to impose at least more cost on them. But we have to be realistic about the leverage that we have, which is not great. Russia
is the main supplier of weapons to the Tatmadaw. Does Moscow have any leverage?
Well, it's coming back to me. I turned you down.
Yes, but I will move it afterwards.
Okay, all right. Russia traditionally has not had much interest in Myanmar, except they like to go in with their opportunities. They're like the vultures who come in when there's a conflagration somewhere. They're there to sell weapons and to make the most out of the devastation. So they do have, if they shut down the weapons, if they decided we will agree with the arms embargo move through the UN, yes, that would go a huge way. They'd shut off their pipeline of money and assistance to the military. That has influence. I don't see it happening, unfortunately. And in fact, in real time, we're seeing even today a delegation going there of the military and others close to the military seeking Russian aid. But the Russians aren't interested in playing ball, but we should do everything we can to isolate them. And frankly, the Chinese can help with that because they don't have an interest in seeing a conflagration on their border either. So, what I wrote in my piece in Foreign Affairs is we have to, even the United States, certainly China and others, have to move beyond great power competition mindset on a place like Burma, because this should not be a place for great power competition. We're seeing it's a zero sum, but in fact, it affects all of us equally in our interests, maybe some more than others, maybe China even more than us. But they should see trying to shut down Russian influence as in their interest. But, I think remains to be seen whether they will see it that way.
I want to turn to Hu Chin Ling Hung and ask him about the influence of your neighbors. Can Thailand be a supporter of your efforts for democracy?
I would say definitely yes. Thailand could be a big help for us. as a neighboring country, it is very important role that supporting our democratization. For example, right now we need help from international communities to support the displaced people. But Thai-Burma border is the most important place, to conduct that kind of help um, and transfer or some kind of support through that border, because there are tons of people who are residing in that Thai border area where the EAOs are, and that is there's another role that Thai can play to leverage with the Burmese military, because EAOs are there also. So that is very important, I think.
Daniel Twining, what's your perspective on the regional role other than ASEAN as a group?
No, I totally agree with Derrick. The region has the most to lose. I mean, frankly, the region has more to lose than the United States. China has a lot to lose from a failed state at the heart of Asia that's producing terrible refugee flows and exacerbating the illicit trade in timber and minerals and drugs and all the things that the old Burma was known for before it opened up and reformed. I think we expect particularly Japan, particularly India, and also some of the more enlightened countries in ASEAN to frankly assess their own interests in not having this kind of, Derrick's word conflagration is an excellent one. I mean, another is just this idea really of, I think Samantha Power, USAID administrator, talked about, having a Syria in Southeast Asia, that this is not something that accords with any of ASEAN's objectives or just the idea of, the Asian economic miracle that we were discussing earlier. So there is a compelling regional stake in not letting the fire burn, in not letting this country seep deeper into just terrible, gruesome forms of human misery and just extraordinary authoritarian abuses, and move it onto a different track. The neighbors have a primary responsibility here, frankly, a greater responsibility than the United States, though I would say we should do everything we can. Clearly, as you've seen today, there is a strong bipartisan consensus to do more, including in both houses of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, and including, I think, with the administration.
I was hoping, Diana, if I could jump in with a couple of questions. Thank you. First, I wanted to ask Special Representative Tin Aung, both Daniel and Derrick have talked about China and the potential role that they could play. I'm wondering if you could comment a bit on how you see China and what potential role they could play in all of this.
Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. China is very important for us also because it is neighboring with our country, and it has got a lot of interest in Burma, and it has got a lot of businesses and economics running in Burma also. I mean, Chinese owned businesses, and not only that, there is a big pipeline, and there are big projects going on in Burma. And so I would say the Chinese leadership is strategic enough to realize that illegal military coup is not good for its strategic interest in Burma, political, social, and economic. And neither is turning a blind eye to the voices of 54 million people, who have made their defiance against the coup known loud and clear. So, and on the NUG's part, we hope to be constructive and mutually beneficial in our engagement with China. It is our neighbor, like I said, and then regional power whose geopolitical importance to Burma cannot be ignored at all. It is in China's interest to prevent Burma's collapse, and I have no doubt that Beijing would want to see a return to peace and stability in Burma. That is very important to them, for them also, because, like I said, they've got a lot of interest in a lot of business and economics, and they cannot do that without engaging with the NUG, which is legitimately elected, and taking into account with national sentiment. So that's why we hope they will do the smartest thing and the right thing. That way, we have both benefits, mutually.
Well, thank you. I was hoping I had a second question, if I may, Diana.
Please.
And it's for the entire panel. Ambassador Mitchell had mentioned the Rohingya. And I wanted to bring that out a little bit. It's been discussed. There's a hearing of the House Foreign Affairs Committee where some have pointed out and raised concerns about the NUG's and its policies toward the Rohingya people, informed by the NLD's past actions as it relates to the Rohingya. I'm curious, for the special representative, if you could talk about how the NUG views the Rohingya in a post-coup return to democracy government. And for Derrick and Dan, if you could speak a bit about how you view this issue and how you believe it could or should impact US support of the NUG going forward.
All right, that is a very important question and a very sensitive question to my understanding. And Daw Zin Mar Aung already, our minister already said about that also, that NUG intends to fully repatriate the Rohingya population and ensure a citizenship program for the returnees. So in doing so, we are in communication with the leaders of Rohingya community, as well as civil society organizations and the activists, to ensure a policy-making process that is inclusive and sustainable. That is very important, I believe. However, make no mistake, anything that we say on the Rohingya issue will just remain words as long as the military continues to hold the de facto power in handling border immigration matters. Which, if I may remind everyone, has always been the case, So we need to ensure a full return of the state apparatus to the people's government, the NUG, and we need to figure out a process for repatriation and citizenship under international standards and norms. And it is important to note that the prevailing sentiment emerging among the majority Burma populace after encountering the military's brutality firsthand on the streets of major cities and urban areas. So it is a sentiment of disdain for the military, as well as the empathy and solidarity with our ethnic brothers and sisters who have had to bear these atrocities by the military in their home states on a regular basis. So I call it a national awakening, and an incredible, powerful, unifying factor that we can serve as basis for the meaningful change and reconciliation. So as the people's government, NUG's policies will be reflective of this national sentiment. So we will approach every issue with that notion at its core, including the Rohingya issue as well. Thank you.
Daniel, do you want to address?
Yeah, I would like to expand on the special representative's point, because it's compelling and worth talking about for another minute, which is that really what we've seen here since February 1st is that the Tatmadaw, the Burmese military, has taken the abusive practices that were on display, that it used, that it deployed against ethnic minorities, and it has deployed those repressive tactics and abuses against ethnic Bamars in the heartland of Burma. So I think there is a new level of understanding that this is not acceptable, that a military shouldn't be in the job of repressing its own citizens, not just in Rakhine or anywhere else, but really across the whole country, and that any settlement is going to have to involve a federal system that empowers subnational government and grants substantial local autonomy, that you're never going to control this very heterogeneous and diverse and geographically complex country from the center, from the capital. Nor are you going to be able to control it through brute force. You're going to have to control, you're going to have to administer and govern it through inclusive institutions that give everybody a voice, and that, quite importantly, protect minority rights. Because there are a lot of minorities in Burma, not just the Rohingya, there are a lot of minorities in Burma. And one reason you have the world's longest running civil war is there essentially has never been a settlement to protect the rights of minorities across the country, who combined make up a substantial portion of the country, half or more than half. So let's think about a way forward that, again, gives everybody a stake in this country's future, and that devolves power down to the local level as much as possible. That's the way forward for this country.
Derrick Mitchell, you will have participated or listened to discussions within the NLD regarding a federal system. Where are the blocks? Where are the opportunities?
In the federal system, it's an extraordinarily complex challenge for the country, is the problem. It sounds sort of, I mean, I think Dan is exactly right in terms of the vision and what's necessary, how to get from here to there in a country of extraordinary complexity and historical trauma, of mistrust. I mean, fundamentally, no one trusts anybody in the country, even between the ethnic groups. There's a lot of mistrust. But they've tried over the past 10 years to have a series of dialogues where even the word federalism was sort of the F word of Burma. You couldn't use the word federalism 10 years ago. And the leadership would be appalled. Well, now they're talking openly about that. That even was a bridge they had to cross. But the key is getting people to sit down and recognize, as Dan said, that use of force is not going to solve this, and that there has to be some kind of federalized structure. But then, the practicalities of these states that are named after different ethnic groups are themselves have different ethnic groups within them, and they have to work out how local do you go? So it's maybe not being clear, but it's very, very complicated to go from the vision to the reality. But the first step is stopping the violence and starting a dialogue and ensuring that that the weapons are put away. And let me just say also, in the NLD, frankly, was not making much headway during their time, unfortunately. They had a number of big dialogues, but there was not a lot of trust being built between the ethnic nationalities and the NLD. So that was not on track as we had hoped in the past 5 years, but there was hope perhaps in a second term they might do better. We hope beyond hope in that regard. But I do want to say it's very good that the Rohingya are not being forgotten in all this. If I just add that they have to be part of the conversation. I think it's important for everyone that they're in some ways a special case because they're not even considered part of the fabric of the country, but they need to be part of the conversation for the NUG, so that this is not just about certain groups getting rights, but about the principle that everybody deserves dignity, everybody deserves rights. That has to be instituted at the foundation for a federal system or any other system. There have to be that acceptance that rule of law and dignity for all equally, and not just for some and not for others. Otherwise, you will never get to a federal system or trust or the kind of Myanmar that will be stable and peaceful.
I want to move topic now to the trial, which is due to take place next Monday, May 24th. That is the presentation of President Hu Win Myint and Aung San Suu Kyi. U Chin Ling Hung, what do you expect to happen that Monday when these two leaders come before the court?
We have a group working on that particular issue. We have lawyers also, so they are on that particular issue. So I cannot answer that question clearly, and I shouldn't either because I do not know 100%. So please excuse me on that.
Do any of Derrick or Daniel, do you have any opinions as to whether we could expect or hope for a legitimate judicial proceedings?
No, I don't think so. Unfortunately, for with regard to which, again, could you repeat?
This is the so-called trial, at least appearance before the judge of both President Hu Win-myint and Aung San Suu Kyi, the state councillor.
No. I mean, there's no free judiciary there. So it's pretty locked. They're just going to add charges. They'll keep them, and they'll find some reason to exclude them from politics and make them out into outlaws. So there's no chance of a fair trial.
Daniel, can you give us any hope? They will appear before the public. Maybe they are able to make statements at that time, or will they be silenced?
So I think we're all waiting and watching and curious to see. I mean, we really have not heard from her because her communications channels have been closed down. And it really is just a reminder of all those extraordinary years when she was under the military's lock and key in the bad old days for such a long period of house arrest. I mean, I think we're all just really startled that we're back to this, and the prospect of some kind of show trial, should that occur, will not make the military's job any easier. It will make it much harder to come to some kind of settlement that will take the situation in a more positive direction, not just for the country, but frankly for the armed forces, who are not actually able to govern this country in its current state because of their own actions. So it is a chance, hopefully, for a reset, but of course, it will not be a credible trial. So we should not get our hopes up.
So I go back to the role of the international community with this important date and event happening on Monday. U Chin Ling, is the international community, is ASEAN able to make statements regarding the importance of their public appearance?
I would say yes. ASEAN, like Derrick and Daniel said, ASEAN plays a big role because they are neighboring countries, but they do not make any types of action yet, and we are expecting a lot from that from the ASEAN, but they haven't done it yet. And that public appearance is very important also, and the ASEAN should make some kind of announcement, and then they should talk to the military leaders on that. But I don't think military leaders will listen to them at all either.
Derrick Mitchell, can we see any more optimistic response or taking advantage of this May 24th judicial appearance?
Well, we'll have to see if they're going to allow them to speak, but I don't see much optimism. Look, the country is behind them. They're clearly the leaders that the people want. That was demonstrated in the election last year. Mm-hmm. That's why they will be silenced, because they do represent the leadership of the people. They have credibility, they have legitimacy, and that makes them a threat. So, and the military wants to shut that down. They showed the military, I think we've tried to see from day one, from February 1st onward, is there any give? Is there any opening? Is there any back door that is possible to allow them to step back? And we haven't seen it. And we're just looking for something to hang on. But they've been steadily more and more brutal, digging in more and more every single day. They demonstrate, and barely even talking about the original reason for this, which was the election last year and their review. It's all about power and corruption and their own mindsets. So no, I don't see them giving it all. There's just no reason to be hopeful in that regard, which is why there needs to be a cost imposed from the outside, because the people have also said enough is enough and we're tired of this. We're not going back. So that irresistible force and unmovable object will lead to, as we talked earlier, a lasting conflagration, use that term again, in the country, that the region then needs to step in and do something, more, whether it will have the effect we want it to or not. There has to be more of a cost imposed to see whether there is a possibility for the military not to go away, because the military will have to exist in some form, but we know there are differences within the military, and maybe somehow, some way, tiny chance that they will change their calculation. Somehow they'll see they do not have a viable path forward, and there may be another path they want to take that protects the majority of the military's interests. We have to at least act like that. And right now we haven't done enough to put the pressure on to get them to that phase. And otherwise we're not seeing them look for a way out or show the kind of opening you're suggesting, where May 24th might be a moment for optimism.
So I'm going to try and find another weapon, and it is with Special Representative Ching Hung, Generation Z. You were part of Generation 88. Generation Z has enjoyed democracy and degrees of freedom rarely known. Is this generation more able to assert its rights and to continue the protest movement?
Yes, this generation, I would say, is more capable than the other generations ever. I don't want to assault anybody, but this generation is very, very important and very, very capable, because they have seen what democracy is. They have seen, they have a taste of what democracy is. Also, they have a taste of what freedom is. They have a taste of what freedom of speech, freedom of media. So they have seen a lot already, and they have access to internet, and they have learned a lot from the communities around the world. So they know what they have to do. That is why they will never surrender. They will keep fighting for the democracy to restore back in Burma. And they are working together with the other generations like us, generation X, Y, Z, and they have access to the world also. Even though the internet access is shut down, they are finding a way out. So that is incredible. They have those kind of skills, and they are communicating with us in the United States. From Burma to the United States, from Burma to EU, from Burma to other countries, from other leaders. They are communicating each other, with any possible ways, and they will never stop until the democracy is restored.
You are so encouraging. What was the latest message you got from Generation Z this morning or last night?
I talked to one of the young Generation Z groups back in Burma, and they are trying to invent something that they can use to knock down the military regime. So, but I cannot say what that is.
Of course.
Can I just add one thing there? Look, I think it's absolutely right, and I think it's inspiring and it deserves our support. And what you see on the screen, except for you, Diana, is a lot of male faces. This is what we call a mantle, I guess, in Washington parlance, which I've tried to avoid. But the fact is, this is led by a lot of women in the country. And I said it when I was there, that the future of the country, the hopeful future of the country, is going to be based on the women of Myanmar. And it's not a knock on the men. It's not a knock on Tin Lin Aung or anybody else, but the resourcefulness, the creativity, the solidarity and fortitude, and bravery we've seen from the women who have led this. We saw it with Zin Mar Aung, who we've known for a long time. But there's so many women that are remarkable on the front lines here, who are just the future. I mean, as Dan said, the future for Myanmar is bright if the military would get out of the way. I mean, there's a lot of challenges. It's not as if the military got out of the way and everything is solved. The fundamental challenges of the country are really, really deep and abiding. But you can see in the younger generation, if the older generation at least would step aside, something pretty remarkable there. And that would work well for ASEAN and Asia and for all of us. And again, the women are forefront. I just want to make that point within the Generation Z component that you mentioned.
So Daniel, IRI's office in Myanmar, Burma is staffed by women, men?
Both Burmese, including obviously wonderful women. But Diana, just to expand on this conversation, I think all of us around the world are just very inspired, frankly, by what's happened in Burma. Obviously, the abuses and the crackdown and the usurpation of power are terrible. So the news is not good. But frankly, small d Democrats all over the world are watching this civic and political resistance and are finding it to be really incredibly empowering and inspiring to them. And we shouldn't remember that. I mean, I think the miscalculation of the military fundamentally, first in the elections when their party got very few votes, they realized they were never going to get the country back through free and fair elections, that you can't go backwards. But really the fundamental miscalculation is the Burmese military, the Tatmadaw, at least at the leadership level, has not changed. But the society has totally changed. The society is empowered, the society is connected, and the society is never going to sit back and let the military leadership brutalize the country and take away their most basic rights. And I think, again, we've just been so inspired by the various forms of resistance. I shared with my entire global staff this week the few lines from the poet Keti, who I think a lot of us are citing just because of the incredible eloquence. But, this line, they shoot in the head, but they don't know the revolution is in the heart.
Yes.
And his closing lament just before he died: I don't want to be a hero. I don't want to be a martyr. I don't want to be a weakling. I don't want to be a fool. But I don't want to support injustice. And if I have only a minute to live, I want my conscience to be clean for that minute. And that just speaks to the eternal human, universal longing and belief in dignity and freedom. And the military is never going to be able to suppress that.
Well, Abe, I sincerely hope that this YouTube will be communicated widely, and that maybe, whether it's the Burmese community in the United States or maybe within Myanmar, Burma, they can hear those wonderful words and their poet recorded in Washington, D.C. Now, I know we're waiting for Ben Cardin, but you must tell us what you want from us for the remaining minutes.
Well, I appreciate that. And we are actually planning on having this video translated into Burmese so that we can post it online and hopefully get the entire discussion that we've had this morning available to people both inside and outside of Myanmar, so they can hear it in their native language. I did have a couple other questions I wanted to ask, if I may, of this panel, especially for the special representative, but also to hear reactions from an American perspective from Dan and Derrick. First being on questions about diplomatic recognition. This is an issue that the foreign minister raised about providing credentials to diplomatic staff by the ruling regime. Some have talked about the United States shifting recognition to the NUG as the legitimate government of Myanmar. I haven't seen that being raised at high levels in the U.S. government yet, but I think it's a question that's been on some people's minds in some of the discussions I've been in. So I'm curious if the special representative would want to address that issue, and also Derrick, Dan, if you have thoughts on that issue from an American perspective.
All right, Abe, thank you for your question. that is very important also to get a recognition from the United States, because the United States is always playing the leading role on Burmese issues, on sanctions, on support, and everything. But this time we have seen that a little bit of concern that diplomats, 3 diplomats got their visa 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then they are already here in the United States and started serving in the Burmese embassy to replace the diplomats who joined the CDM movement, and they were revoked from their position. So that is what we are concerned about, the United States policy on that. But we appreciate the United States focus on, criticizing the military junta and standing firm on not recognizing the illegal military regime. That is very clear. However, like I said, equal attention must be given to recognizing working with the rightfully elected government of the people of Myanmar, the NUG. The U.S. Department of State, I would say, must immediately cease all diplomatic relations with the junta-backed Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would request that not to issue visa or accept any visa applications of those people who are slated to reduce our diplomats, who have declared defiance against the junta. I'm expecting, U.S. To do more and do better, to stand on the right side of history and back its words to support with the real action. And another thing is, I would request that, I don't know if that is possible or not, but I want to see that U.S. government appoint a dedicated special envoy for Burma to give this issue the attention and the priority it deserves. We envision the role of the special envoy to work closely with us and serve as the primary interlocutor across the U.S. government agencies, as well as coordinate Myanmar policy across like-minded allies in the EUs and the West, and including the Canada, and partners in the region, like Quad or ASEAN. That'll be very appreciated. All the State Department and U.S. government also. So I want to show my appreciation to State Department, Department of Homeland Security, and then National Security Council. They have done a lot to support our cause and engage us on a regular basis. So I hope this continues and at a heightened level of attention and the priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, Derrick, your reactions on this issue, on the special representative's comments?
Well, I agree that Abe Denmark would make an excellent U.S. special representative for Burma. So I second the motion. Derrick is the diplomat here, not me, as may be obvious already. But there is a parallel with Venezuela, where it was under the last administration that the U.S. State Department actually asked the Maduro diplomats to leave, since he had stolen an election and is not a legitimate leader, and handed the Venezuelan embassy over to the Venezuelan government, representing the Venezuelan parliament that was freely elected, that has remained the only remaining democratic institution in that country. I mean, there are some parallels with Burma, because you do have an elected parliament here in the form of the CPRH, and then by extension the NUG, that actually has popular sovereignty via the ballot box that represents the will of the people. So it may be interesting to look at that Venezuela parallel a little more.
Thank you, Dan.
And I just say that, I mean, I think what Tin Lin Aung says is quite strong and reasonable. I think most important for the State Department, for the West, and for everybody is simply not to legitimize the military junta and to give all due respect to the NUG and the CRPH as legitimate representatives of the people and the national will. So that has to be airtight by everyone, that they give due respect, be in continued dialogue and consultations with them going forward.
Thank you, Derrick.
Well, thank you to this entire panel, to Special Representative Tin Aung, Dr. Negroponte, Dan Twining, Ambassador Mitchell. Thank you all so much for participating in this panel. It's been very interesting and very much appreciate your comments and thoughts on this.
Thanks.
We're now going to turn to conclude today's event. We're going to turn to Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland for his concluding remarks. Senator Cardin was first elected to the United States Senate in 2006 and previously served in the U.S. House of Representatives beginning in 1987. Senator Cardin currently serves as chair of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, and he's a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations, Finance, and Environment and Public Works Committees, and has been a leader in Congress on foreign affairs for decades. I would also note that both myself and Special Representative Tin Aung are Maryland residents. So with that, Senator Cardin, it's my pleasure to hand things over to you for concluding remarks.
Well, to Abe Denmark, why do you think I accepted your invitation? I knew that you were a Marylander. I try to give good constituent services. So thank you so much for your work at the Wilson Center. The Wilson Center is one of our most important entities, and we thank you for what you do. You remind us constantly of our responsibilities as global citizens, and we appreciate that. And just your mission, which is independent research, open dialogue, and actionable ideas, is exactly what we need in global engagement. So we in the Senate really value the contribution that you make to our debate on foreign policy, and today is no exception. You had an excellent program in regards to what has happened in Burma, and we very much look forward to the type of discussion you had with the special representative, your panel, with my colleagues in Congress as to what we need to do. But let me put this with the backdrop of what is happening globally before we get to the specifics in Burma. We are seeing a significant challenge to democracy. The Freedom House says we've had a 15-year global democratic recession, with more countries declining in democratic institutions over that period of time. And I could go through specific countries. You've gone through some of them. We know what's happening in Russia, constant decline with the tragic detention of Mr. Navalny and his health being very much questioned. We saw what recently happened in Belarus. Not that that's a democratic country, it's not, but moving in the wrong direction, not in the right direction. We see that in NATO partners, the decline of democracy in Turkey, but also in countries like Hungary and Poland. We see that in our own hemisphere. I caught the tail end of your discussion about Venezuela. We also could talk about Cuba. There was great hope that we were going to see some significant change in Cuba. Well, there's been mixed action there. And of course, Cuba's actions in Venezuela is certainly not helping democratic development. And even a country like Colombia, a country that I've taken a great interest in with Senator Blunt, the two of us co-chair the Atlantic Task Force on Colombia, we've seen some troubling trends in recent months. So in the backdrop of looking what's happening in Burma, we need to understand that there's been a global challenge to democratic states. At the same time, we've seen a significant uptick in corruption. Now, corruption's in every country, but corruption's the fuel for autocratic regimes, as we've seen with Mr. Putin perfecting it with his oligarchs on how he uses corruption to sustain his power. So we also see that we've had a challenge for independent reporting. And it's very interesting, out of sight, out of mind. If you don't know what's going on, you don't respond to it. And I give as a way of an example, it was the photographs that came to public view in regards to the torture episodes about the United States that brought about change in our country. You need to have accurate reporting in order to be able to get global response. And reporters are challenged in all parts of the world in regards to their safety. I want to thank Radio Free Asia for the work that they have done in regards to Asia. It's been an important source of information, but we have to recognize that we have a serious trend of the safety of journalists. Add to that the future and effectiveness of NGOs and how they have been challenged by certain laws that have tried to minimize civil society engagement in the country. All of that has made it more challenging. NGOs and civil societies, to me, are the guardians of democracy and human rights, and they are being challenged today. So I put that all in context as we looked at what we can do with Myanmar. And quite frankly, Burma was an isolated state, as we know, under military control, under an iron hand, in violation of basic rights. And the United States led a global effort to isolate Burma because of those extreme activities of autocratic and oppressive regimes. And then we saw some progress being made. We saw the effort to install a civilian government. The President of the United States, President Obama, took personal interest in the country. And we saw real progress that we thought could be made towards democracy with the election of the National Unity Government. All of these were very positive steps and caused the United States to say, hey, you know, maybe what we did before has worked. Maybe it was too extreme, but it's time to start really moving towards a much more normal relationship, not only with the United States, but within Asia and within the world community. And we're moving in that direction. And yes, there were bumps along the way. And there were days that things were going that we were not happy about, but we thought we were on this path. And I remember many meetings with representatives of the National Unity Government as we were making this type of progress. But then two things happened. First, as we all know, the coup on February 1st. The abrupt seizure of the will of the people from the will of the people by the military junta. That was unconscionable and required immediate action. I was pleased that Senator Young and I introduced legislation within days that has been passed condemning the military coup in the country. But at the same time, there was another events that were occurring of severe human rights violations against the Rohingya population. And that started in 2017. 740,000 fled to Bangladesh, and we thank what Bangladesh did in order to let them come in, but the circumstances are unsustainable, and it was clearly an attempt to remove a population safety in the country, something that just brought the world attention to the gross violations of human rights. These two events required action. And there was action taken. And I want to compliment the Biden administration. They took action in imposing sanctions. I will shortly be introducing legislation that will provide both humanitarian assistance and accountability for the human rights violators during these recent activities. So we need to respond and make it clear on the carrot stick approach. Yes, we want to normalize and help nurture the development of democratic institutions in Burma. We want to support the National Unity Government, but we will stand up against the military junta and their illegal actions and take the appropriate steps, not to punish the Burmese people, but to say that we stand with the people of Burma for a genuine democracy and a more peaceful, just society for all. I started by putting this in the backdrop of what was happening globally. So this is not an isolated circumstance of the decline of democracy or protection of human rights. And that's why it's important, and I was pleased to hear President Biden talk about a value-based foreign policy. We really need to wrap our foreign policy decisions in our values. And that's why I was pleased to be one of the leaders in Congress as we passed first the Magnitsky Sanction Act and then the Global Magnitsky Act. And by the way, in the bill that's on the floor of the Senate as we speak, there's a permanent extension of Global Magnitsky that's included in that. And the US leadership, other countries have acted. We've now seen the EU act. Of course, Canada's already acted. We've seen other countries follow our suits, that if a country doesn't protect the human rights of its citizens, we'll take action against the perpetrators of those gross violations of human rights. And we need to do more to fight corruption. So yes, I have introduced some additional legislation that would, with Senator Wicker, that would provide the capacity within our missions to understand the circumstances of corruption within the states that they represent the United States at, and to have action plans. And with Senator Young, these are both bipartisan bills, so that we use a rating system similar to what we do in trafficking in humans to track progress in all countries in which we have relations in progress to fight corruption, because that's the fuel for the autocratic power structure. So we really need to embrace the value-based foreign policy, whether it's in Burma or other parts of the world. And I must tell you, I think the discussions you're having at the Wilson Center so much helps us. So let me just conclude where I started. Thank you for holding this meeting this morning. It's very important. I look forward to your actionable ideas, which is one of your principles, so that we can help along with the administration provide guidance for the people of Burma so they can truly enjoy a government that respects their rights and represents their rights.
Well, thank you, Senator Cardin, for your thoughts on Myanmar and broader regional and issues of human rights. Thank you for such kind words about the Wilson Center. We very much appreciate it, and it's wonderful to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, everybody. Stay safe and keep doing the great work you're doing.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So today, we've explored a truly complex and ever-evolving crisis with profound implications for the well-being of millions of people in Myanmar and the long-term health and success of democracy for that beautiful country. Going forward, the United States and the international community, and most of all, the people of Myanmar, face a growing crisis that will require tailored policy responses and coordination to resolve. Our goal today was to discuss these issues and better understand what the United States can do. We at the Wilson Center will continue to work on these and other issues across the Indo-Pacific and around the world. And with that, thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon at the Wilson Center.